If someone offered you a second chance, a do-over in some part of your life, I wonder if you'd take it. Better yet, if someone offered you a second chance at life, would you take it? Is that even possible? Welcome, everyone, to the Full Life Podcast by Grace Church, where we hope to inspire, challenge, and clarify your next steps in faith. I'm David Lawson, and today we are talking about that topic. We're talking about the God of second chances. And this podcast grew out of a sermon series that we're doing here at Grace called Jonah, a Man on the Run. And if you haven't listened to any of those messages, I encourage you to go to graceforohio.org, because I know that there'll be an encouragement for you and help you in the next steps of your own spiritual journey. Well, I'm really excited to talk about this topic, and I'm very excited for you to hear the story of a woman named Kelly Lawson, who understood that God gave her a second chance, and she embraced that for herself. Welcome, Kelly. Glad you could join us today.
Me too.
If you don't know, Kelly and I are related. Kelly is our daughter-in-law, and Julie and I are very proud to have her part of our family. And Kelly, a lot of people know you who will be listening to this, but there are some people who don't know you, so why don't you go ahead and take the opportunity to introduce yourself?
Like you said, I'm Kelly Lawson. I am married to his son, Jacob, who is their first boy, and we have a son named Matthew. We call him Matty. He is 6 years old, and our daughter, Emma, is 2, and I've lived in Ohio since 2015, so winter is... I'm still adjusting.
Yeah. Floridian girl.
For sure. Yes. Yeah. It snows and I'm like, ooh, flurries. But yeah.
Well, I'm really glad you're here. I'm really looking forward to people hearing your story, because you have probably, like I have, known people who are running away from God. Mm-hmm. They're on the run in their lives. But at the same time, they're reaching out for a second chance, maybe a third chance, fourth chance, depending on how life is going, right? I mean, that's a reality for a lot of people. They run so far that they don't think they can get back. Yeah. They've kind of lost their way. They're in so deep, they don't feel like they can get out. They might be have feelings of depression or anxiety or whatever. Mm-hmm. And they just wonder, has God given up on them? Mm-hmm. Is it possible for me to get back to where I need to be, or maybe for the first time to get where I need to be? And I know that's a little heavy, but that's where, when you're talking about a God of second chances, that's the kind of things you're talking about. So you can probably relate to that, can't you?
Yes, very much so. All of the things. It was 14 years ago that I came to a place where I felt there was just no hope. I looked down at my future and there was just darkness. I was struggling with extreme depression at the time. I was a junior in college, lived away from home. So everything was kind of new. And I wasn't in a comfortable spot. And so I just dove deeper into my emotions of depression and crippling anxiety, where I just either went to class or I stayed home. There wasn't anything else. But it was all having to do with my life, my living, like what I wanted to do. And so that was kind of like the ending of a very long season of not making the right choices and feeling empty and trying to fill my life with things. So, the root of it all was because as a 6-year-old, I was compared outwardly my looks to my sister. And that fed the lie through my growing years that I wasn't good enough, that nothing I did, said, do, I couldn't do a thing or say anything or look a certain way in order to be good enough to live this life. And so at the age of 14, I started drinking, trying to find an escape. At 16, I started doing drugs. And then as years got older, I tried to find affection from men to show me my worth versus looking at the place I knew I needed to go. So I was very much in that place of like, I didn't see any hope. I didn't see an out. And I didn't think I was good enough to be saved. And so I definitely lived that in my life, for sure.
Yeah, and so that brought you to a point where?
So 14 years ago, it brought me to a point where I saw no hope, and I thought to myself, the the only way to find peace was to not live. And so I attempted to take my own life and miraculously was saved. But I remember thinking, if I wasn't here, I would find peace. And I knew that I would be in heaven. And so without a shadow of a doubt, I knew that if I take my own life, I'll find peace because I'll be in heaven. I'll be with Jesus. But I didn't. Yeah, so my whole life changed from that point on because I did not succeed in taking my life, and the Lord met me there.
Yeah, and we're all grateful for that. Yeah. And I think what we want people to, again, I want to reiterate, we want people to know that there is hope.
Yeah.
There is hope.
Yeah.
I mean, you found it, and you've never gone too far that God cannot reach you. You've never run so far that God cannot rescue you. There's never a point where there isn't any hope. But people are feeling, there are a lot of people out there who are feeling what you felt. Maybe not to the same point where you got, but they have those emotions. They have those feelings that are going on in their lives. And they feel like they feel God so many times that there's no way back to freedom and peace and joy and meaning. And your story is one where the resounding answer to that question is there a way back? Is yes. That is the answer to the question. So let's start here. Let's start, where would you say you were spiritually at that time? Would you describe yourself as someone who was saved? Would you describe yourself as someone who was a follower of Jesus? How would you describe where you were spiritually?
I would say I was a believer at that time.
Okay.
I believe that Jesus was who he said he was, and he did what he said he could, what he did, that he was the way, the truth, and the life. The difference is I believe that it was for everyone but me. For some reason, I was the exception to that rule. And even though I grew up in a Christian household where I learned all of the basics, I learned the rights and the wrongs and what Jesus wants and what he doesn't want. And but no one ever took the time to show me how to live out that truth or show me what a relationship with Jesus looked like. Like, my parents divorced when I was 6. And so after that point, my dad wasn't in the picture. And my mom was a single mom of 4. So she did the best she could. And then, but I didn't have anyone influencing my life, pointing me back to Jesus and that relationship. I was only ever taught the religion of it all. So I didn't actually have this personal relationship with Jesus to where I could lean on. I just had the to-dos, do this, do that. And so I couldn't lean on that in those dark spots because I wasn't doing those things. But I would say that I believed he was the way, the truth, and the life. And I think that's why I thought, okay, if I end it, I'll have peace. But I didn't live it. So I was not a follower of Jesus.
So faith was a part of your life. It just wasn't running your life. It wasn't ruling your life. There was no lordship of Jesus in your life. There was
influence of the world for sure.
Yeah.
That was the only influence.
Yeah. So what is it that you talked about, this moment of crisis that you had, and that's where we all get to when we kind of hit rock bottom. There's this point where, okay, what do I do now? That moment, that crucible moment, that moment of crisis. What is it that brought you to that moment in your life? So a definition of hope that I really love, it's from the book called The Cry of the Soul by Dan Allender and Trimple Longman. They state, hope allows us to go on with living. It gives us some sense that things are going to get better, life will improve, and the problems besieging us will reach some stage of a resolution. But when I read that definition and I think of that place I was in the complete opposite. So I think what brought me to that complete opposite point was the decisions I was making, was who I was spending my time with, the things that were influencing the lie that I believed I wasn't good enough. Instead of feeding the hope that is in Jesus, it was feeding the lie that I was not good enough for Jesus. And so that kind of brought me to that crisis point of I give up. There's nothing I can do. What can I do? Because I saw no resolution for my life. I saw no purpose in living. Yeah. Well, a lot of people are allowing their lies to be fed.
Yeah.
Right? And it just takes you deeper. It takes you further down into the crisis and gives you, makes things even less hopeful, for sure. So where did God take you in that moment? Like what decision did you ultimately end up making when you hit rock bottom, when you hit that moment of crisis? What decision did you end up making? Where did God lead you?
So in the moment of when the attempt was unsuccessful, I remember overwhelmingly feeling God telling me, and like something lit up in my spirit and my mind and my heart that said, "You are worthy because of what my son did. I'm not done with you." Essentially, it's like that. Oh, and it wasn't an audible voice, but it was just this overwhelming. It was like the Lord just wrapped me in His arms and changed my perspective, and I allowed that change because I was in such a broken place. I was in a for sure spiritual warfare. There was just something like. And the Lord was fighting for me, and as He does every day. Yeah. And so I ended up basically surrendering my life in that moment of like, okay, I have to change. And it wasn't obviously a over the night thing, but I made the decision that I was going to change.
Yeah. So you got this new lease on life, and you embraced it, right? Well, tell us more about what was your pursuit after that? What did you do with this new lease on life that God had given to you?
So I grew up in therapy. So the very first thing I did was go and meet with my therapist. I started at the age of 10, and I was still seeing her, even though I wasn't living in the same town. I'd call her, and so I went back and I just kind of told her where I was, and she knew my story. And she was like, I would strongly recommend you moving back home. Move back home with your mom. And go to a church that you trust, because she was also a believer. Thank the Lord. And so I did. That semester ended. It was November when I attempted, and the semester was ending in December. And so I moved back home, and I took a break, and I just lived with my mom. And I called the pastor that I grew up knowing, and he basically was like, "Yes, come to church, and I also want you to serve." And he kind of inserted me into this. Into the youth group, serving as a youth leader, and me thinking, I'm like, I am just like these teenagers. Like, who am I to be a youth leader? And he's like, no, it's not so much for you to serve, but for you to meet the other leaders, essentially. Like, he kind of set that up. And so I started serving, and my entire time was taken up by the things I was doing within the church and ministry. And I got to meet a woman named Maji, and in that relationship, I got to meet several other young people that we just lived life together, surrendered to Jesus.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, I want to explore a little bit more a couple of these, maybe highlight a little bit more of what you just shared with us. One, you've used a couple of times the word surrender. Very important word, because that defines a different relationship than what you had with the Lord before. So talk to us a little bit more about when you say surrender, what are you saying? What are you communicating when you say that? What are you describing?
So I've always believed that there is a difference between a believer and a follower of Jesus. And that's kind of the difference that the Lord has kind of brought in my life of what I was and who I became. Surrender to me is someone who your life is no longer your own, essentially. Like, you live life with Christ in mind. When I surrendered my life, 1 Colossians 1:16-18 came to me, and that became my life verse. And it's paraphrasing is, everything is made by God and for God, and Christ is first in everything. And so my life was so much about me because of I did theater, and my name was in lights, and I sang, and all of these other things that I wanted the acclamations but never felt the worth. And now my life was about Jesus, and the complete opposite of my name in lights. It was now, I want His name in lights. I want people to look at me and see Him. And so surrender to me is like, we have it here at Grace, like, you are a fully surrendered follower of Jesus. And that just, I think it just is the word image would be just holding your hands out and giving Him all of who you are. And with that, you make other choices. And so that would be the difference, is believer and follower. A follower is someone who's just left their old life and followed after Jesus.
Yeah, the freedom is in the following, ultimately, right? I mean, that's where it is. If if you're not following, because Jesus said, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. That's we put on these burdens in our life when we're not following. He wants us to follow because he wants the best for our lives. We think we want the best, but following is actually where the freedom is.
Yeah.
You also talked about discipleship. And you talked about someone coming alongside you. Describe that a little bit for us and how beneficial that was for you and maybe for someone who finds themselves in these circumstances.
Yeah. So Maji, she was just a few years older than me, and she was a youth leader, and she went to the local Bible school that I later went to and met Jacob. And she is wise beyond her years. But she basically, I call her my pillar. We don't have a active everyday relationship now, but I will always see her as the person that the Lord placed in my life to hold me up. And she basically just took me under her wing. She spent time with me. She'd show up at my work just to see how I'm doing. She got to know my hopes and my hurts, and she ultimately would point me back to Jesus. And even though those lies kept creeping in, as they do, she would take me back to the truth. And she would teach me the word of God, but also she would just live life with me. And in that relationship with her, the other youth leaders, we just kind of became this tight-knit family, essentially, of young adult believers striving to live for Jesus. And so we were all kind of discipling each other, but living life with someone who might be in the same boat as you or a couple steps behind you is super influential. Especially if you're so used to being influenced by other things, having that change of scenery essentially is super important. And it was for me because Maji was my pillar. She held me up for a year or two before I could finally stand on my own, essentially. And yet she was still there through it all.
And Maji wasn't the only one. She may have been the primary one, but I heard you talk about the value of getting other people in your life too. The scripture says bad company corrupts good character. Getting around good people reinforces that good character. Was that the same for you?
Yeah. My mom used to say when I was a kid, you are who your friends are, which is essentially bad company corrupts character. And I never, of course, as a teenager, you'd roll your eyes. But that was for me very much the case. I would surround myself with people who were like-minded in a worldly sense of they would drink too underage, or they would get drunk, or they would do drugs, or they would sleep around or go party or whatever. And I had all of those influences. And so when I surrendered my life to the Lord, I had to make the conscious effort to essentially bring every one of those relationships before him and say, what do I do? Because I love those people. Even though they are of the world, I loved them. They were friends of mine. They did live life with me, but they weren't the best that God had for me because of their priorities. And so I basically, one by one, just had to either walk away or just sit down with them and say, hey, I'm not doing this anymore. And this is why, and actually get to share my story. And most of the time they'd understand, and others would be like, well, you're crazy kind of thing. But, having that change of priority and spending time with people who have the same priorities in life is very important.
Yeah, but ultimately, it wasn't the friends, it wasn't Maji, it wasn't. It was the gospel that really brought you freedom. Tell us a little bit about the change in perspective you got on the gospel in that moment of crisis. So
I remember I've been doing a Devo series, and my best friend here in Ohio, she said, for the first time, I can physically feel the love of God. And it's only because she's not doing anything different other than she is spending more time in her word, and she is spending more time in prayer. And it's funny because at that point, I didn't believe that it was for me. I thought it was for everyone else but me. And then that day came and I was unsuccessful. And then the perspective change of, you are worthy because of what my son did. I had freedom in that of, it's not anything I do. I can rest essentially in that Jesus did it all. And there's nothing I can do or say to earn that salvation. He just loves me because he loves me.
Amen.
And that there was freedom in the gospel because of that, because of the religion that I was taught and the pressure to do all the right things in order to be holy, righteous. The Lord calls us holy. And our response is what we do.
Yeah.
Our response to his love is how we is like being holy and righteous and making those choices. But I didn't have to do those in order to earn salvation. He freely gave it to me. And so I think it clicked that day of knowing when he said, "You are worthy because of what my son did," I finally believed it. It was something within me just lit up, and I found rest in the gospel that I don't have to do anything. I don't have to like make all the good decisions, or yes, that's important, but I don't have to do it in order to earn his love.
Yeah.
And so, or his sacrifice.
Yeah. And yet the gospel brings transformation. And I think as rather than just someone claiming they have faith, if there's no transformation, then you have not embraced the gospel, because the grace of God is transformative. It's powerful. It leaves it's what allows us to leave the past behind and pursue the new life that God has for us. Well, we're talking with Kelly Lawson, and we're hearing her story about the God of second chances and how embracing the God of second chances can put a new lease on your life. Kelly, I mentioned earlier that this grew out of a sermon series we're doing here at Grace called Jonah, Man on the Run.
Yeah.
Your life parallels a lot of Jonah's story. So what are some parallels that you see in your life compared to the life of Jonah? So
Jonah is one of my favorites. Chapter 1 and chapter 2 are probably my ultimate favorites because you see that kind of change in his perspective. In chapter 1, when I read through it, I pull out 3 types of confused believers. And I believe that I was very much a confused believer. The first one would be rebellious, people who know what to do but don't do it. The second would be ignorant, people who do not understand how to do it, or they don't understand it at all. Or a pain person, a person in pain. If anyone's in pain, their perspective is corrupted. And so I would say I was all 3 of those things before I surrendered my life. And then,
well, tell us a little bit about how each of those was lived out. What did the rebellion look like? What did the pain look like? What did these things look like in your life?
I think the rebellion was because I was a believer. It kind of stemmed through the ignorance. And then the rebellion also stemmed out of pain, being the pain person. So it was like a domino effect in my life, essentially, like believing the lie at a very young age that I was not good enough, that nothing I did was worth anything, kind of bled into, okay, that's the painful part. Well, I'm in pain, so I'm going to make all these decisions to try to fill the pain, to like put a Band-Aid over it. And so I would do that. I would go out and drink. I would go out and do drugs. I would meet up with different guys and make really bad decisions, only to try to like ease that pain. But it was always there. So the rebellion would be the choices I make, knowing what I'm doing is wrong because I know I am a believer of Jesus. And then the ignorance of I only ever understood the religion of the gospel and the Bible and not the relationship of who Jesus is. So I was all 3 of those types of confused believers, and I didn't know what to do. So I just kept living on my own and making the decisions I had.
Yeah. So you were on the run.
Yeah, for sure.
Like Jonah was. And I've heard you talk a little bit about some of the lessons that you've learned from the life of Jonah, some of the principles that are there. Any more you want to share with us about his life there? Yeah.
So chapter 2, he starts praying to the Lord as he's in, the belly of the whale. And all of chapter 2 is just different principles, I would say. Verse 1, I kind of cross-reference it for Hannah, but it's basically, it doesn't matter what you've done or where you're at, you can turn to him. And Hannah is probably one of my favorite characters or people in the Bible. because she goes before the Lord raw and real. She just like to the point where, they think the priest thinks she's completely intoxicated. And like I can just see the blubbering mess that she was. And I just think I was at a place where I did not deserve a life worth living. Like that's kind of where I was. But I was able to turn back to the Lord. So Jonah praying out his prayer, it doesn't matter where you've been, where you're at, you can always turn to him. He will always chase you. He will leave the 99 for the one,
And the Bible is filled with stories like this.
Yeah.
You think about the prodigal, probably one of the most famous stories in the Bible. Most everybody understands it. It's in the vernacular of our culture. I'm the prodigal, right?
The prodigal, yeah.
God always has the light on.
Always.
He's always waiting for you to come home, always wanting to draw you.
The door is never closed.
Yeah,
for
and
sure.
I love what Paul wrote to the Romans. He said, where sin increased. Whew, I love this part. Grace increased all the more. You can't get to the bottom of it.
Yeah.
And the whole point is rescue, though. It's not just forgive and forget. It's about, no, I'm doing this to transform you. I want a different life for you. And so the Bible is filled with these come home stories.
Yeah.
And they're not just feel good stories. They're real stories about the power of God's redemption in the life of a person in your life. Definitely exemplifies that. That's awesome.
Yeah. Jonah even says, like, he ends his prayer with, you, the God of my salvation. So he's saying, you're my rescue. Right. You are my only hope. And then, of course, he, like, vomits out Jonah. And he's on, there's, God is the only hope, for sure.
Yeah. And, of course, emotions were a big part of this for you, too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You were, emotions sometimes rule over truth.
Yeah, that's I think that's verse 2 in chapter 2. It's like, my emotions are not going to change God's response. And I remember saying that our Bible teacher, Pastor Randy Smith, he would always say, emotions do not dictate truth.
Yeah.
And that is something that, even in today's walk with the Lord, I still have to remind myself that. And Jacob, my husband, is very good about that. He is always like, do you want to hear the truth behind your feelings? Do you want to hear the but God this? And I'm always like, yes, please, because I need that. You need those people in your life. And because of that, I can see verse 6 says God's mercy is in the rescue. And so God did not deliver me that day that I attempted my life only for me not to fully surrender. But if he made the choice, if I had not made the choice to surrender, he would continually call me back. Yeah. And so remembering that his truth overrides my emotions gives me hope that he's there.
Yeah.
He's going to always be there.
Truth remains regardless, because truth is found in the person of Jesus Christ. He is truth. And he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. He never changes. Truth is always there, always perseveres, is always present, and nothing that we can do, nothing that we can think, nothing that anybody else can do, no one's impression of us can change the truth about God's love for us, and he wants to rescue us.
Yeah.
That will remain true always, regardless.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. I think Jonah, he, at the end of chapter 2, he, I think it's verse 7 and 9. The principle pulled out is forgetting God is the source of my problem. So I always say this, and my Grace group is probably so tired of me saying it, but I believe that the enemy's number one goal is not for us to walk away from God. It's for us to forget who he is. Because when we forget, that's when we start making all of the decisions that lead us out of righteousness. And so remembering who he is and what he did and knowing that was freely given to us is the only hope we'll ever have.
So you must have put some systems or structures in place to keep God in front of you.
Yeah.
What would you say some of those are?
Currently?
Yeah.
So, I would say staying in the Word, always being in the Word, and then having people around you who might be either coming out of or have lived the same type of struggle as far as I knew what to do. I just never did it. And now I'm surrendered and I want to live surrendered. Living life with those people, being discipled, discipling others. Like that is a huge thing that is very important to both Jake and I, is to have those people who might be a little ahead of us in their faith journey, or they're right next to us, and just living life with them, allowing them to point us back to Jesus. But the biggest thing is like being in his word. You will know his character.
Yeah. It is so transformative. I remember you had mentioned going to the Bible Institute in Florida, and that's where you and Jacob met. Yeah. I remember a phone call in October that Julie and I had with him. And he was talking, and who are you? Because it was like he was talking about things, he was saying things, he was thinking things that he'd never talked about, thought about, or said before. And it was because he was in the Word every single day. Yeah. And I remember Bob Federhoff talking about this with his dad, Dean. He said, I don't know how many times, this was early in my ministry, he said, I don't know how many times my dad has read through the Bible. He said, and then he said this, he said, the cumulative impact of that can't be measured. And I thought, wow, that's what you're talking about. That's keeping God in front of you, being with the right people, being in the Word, having church a part of your life. And again, it's not the religion side of things; it's an investment side. Yeah. I'm going to put myself in a position where I'm going to be reminded of and hear and have the Word of God, the truth of God, brought into my heart and into my life. Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you embraced the God of second chances. Look at what happened to your life because you've done that. Just look how different things are. What would not have been if you had not done that. And for those who are listening, if you find yourself in that spot where you feel like you're hopeless, God has more for you. He has more for you. And he wants you to embrace the second chance that he is offering to you, just like he offered to Kelly. And I'm so grateful, Kelly. I really am. Let's talk about some next steps. We're big on next steps here. And nothing's more frustrating than hear something like this and then not know what to do.
You're like, what do I do now?
Yeah, what do you do now? So you and I've talked a little bit about what some next steps might be coming out of your story. Let's start with Regen. That's a ministry that we have here, which is helpful for people in a variety of circumstances. Give us a little description of what Regen is, because I think there might be some misconception about it, what Regen is, and maybe even how they can sign up.
Sure. So the curriculum of Regen is very much set up like AA or NA, Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, in steps. But the difference is it takes a biblical approach. So the very first time you come, one of the leaders will give you a list. I think it's 117 things. But how I describe it is they're sin struggles. So I might be a seasoned believer and have strong faith and a surrendered follower of Jesus, but I still struggle with anxiety. I still struggle with depression. I still struggle with comparison. I still struggle with all of the things. And so it kind of brings out, okay, have you struggled with any of the things? Have you gone through any of these things? And so it doesn't just go with addiction. It goes with sin struggles. And so there is, you come in and you meet a group of people and you learn something from a truth of the Bible, but you're walking through steps to basically see victory. And even the people who have seen victory, it's still beneficial because you're around like-minded people who are saying, I have struggled, or I am struggling. I want to live for Jesus. And so it's kind of like you're just kind of dropped into a group already. But they can sign, if you just go to, it's on Tuesday evenings, and they just go to Grace website, graceforohio.org, right? Yeah. Okay. And it's under there, but it's really beneficial. I've gotten the honor of doing two rounds of the steps. And Jake is still one of the male leaders. So it's still part of our life, and we're still champions for it. And it's very beneficial for sure.
So basically, if you're a human being, Regen is for you.
Being,
because you said a list of 117 of things. Is that all? There's got to be more.
There's got to be more, yeah.
The other thing besides Regen, discipleship was so huge in your life. And you described what that was for us. But what advice would you give to someone who is listening?
I would say, especially with our church and the great people we have, I would say getting into a grace group is probably a good way to open that door. Chris and Rachel Franks are our grace group leaders, but they have also become our disciplers. And so it's not we don't just meet with grace group and they facilitate the lesson and teach us new things. It's they have lived life with Jake and I and our family and have become a part of our family. And so just going into a grace group will at least open that door to meet people who the Lord might be like, hey, y'all need to live life together.
Get somebody who loves you, cares for you.
Yes, is for you.
Right,
for sure.
Right. And then if you're somebody, even if you're somebody who, we're humans, we're struggling in this life, but there might be somebody else that might need a friend, might need someone to keep pointing them to Jesus like you talked about. Yeah. You could be that for somebody else too.
Yep.
Let's talk about influences. We talked about bad company corrupts good character, and the bold and courageous and loving conversations you had with people about, hey, I'm just not going to do this anymore. Yeah. I love you, but I'm not doing this. You can come with me, but I'm not going to let you influence me anymore.
Right.
Talk about those influences that people need to have in their life.
The saying is true. You are who your friends are. What you take in as far, like we hear a lot about what movies you watch, what music you listen to, what books you read. What you take in is definitely going to have some effect in who you are and what choices you make and how you respond to things. And so if you're influenced by anything, being friends with people of the world is not wrong. That's good. That's what the Lord has called for us to do, is to be Jesus to those people. It's how are they influencing you? Like, are you investing in them, or are they investing in you in a worldly way? And so it's really taking a look at who influences me or what influences me, and then quite literally just ripping it off, ripping it away. Jake and I talk about that all the time when sin struggles, is like, you have to cut it off. Like, cut off your arm. The Lord, it's a very graphic thing.
Metaphorical.
But it's metaphorical in a sense of like, the Lord is saying you need to remove it from your life. Yeah. Because if you don't, it's going to continue to influence you.
Right.
So it's really picking apart your time for sure, and what you spend your time doing and who you spend your time with.
Yeah, because it matters.
It matters, yeah.
And of course, the big one, this could have been number one on the list, but the big one is salvation.
Yeah.
This isn't self-help. This isn't 5 easy steps. This is a lifestyle. It's a followership. It's salvation that's found in Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And believing is the very first step, because he is who he says he is, and he did what he said he did, and he is the way and the truth and the life. Our response to that love, to that sacrifice, is how we live our life. Yeah. And so, it's freely given.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a relationship, like we like to say it around here this way. It's a relationship we were created to have because you were created to know God and created to have a relationship with him. It's a relationship we don't have because of sin. Sin has separated us from God. We have a holy God, and we're unholy people. And so it's created this division. Our iniquities have separated us from God, Isaiah said. Yeah. But it's a relationship we can have because of Jesus, and he is the one who bridges the gap. He paid the penalty for our sin against a holy God, and in exchange for that, he gave us his righteousness. And of course, we receive that by faith. It's something we must choose to have. And so if you're someone who hasn't yet entered into a relationship with Jesus Christ, strongly encourage you to investigate that for yourself. Talk to somebody who you know is a Christian, who's a follower of Jesus Christ, a local pastor, and they'd be happy to walk you through what it means to know Jesus personally, because that is the foundation. That's what you discovered ultimately was the followership part. Yeah. Well, Kelly, thanks so much for your time. And I know people are going to resonate with your story, and I think they're going to get great benefit from it. So thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Well, I trust our time with you has been helpful for you as you pursue the full life that God has for you, in part by pursuing the God of second chances, because Jesus came that you might have life and you might have it to the full. If you don't have a church home, you're certainly welcome to join us. Just visit our website, graceforohio.org, and you can find our meeting and streaming times. In the meantime, we're praying that God is at work in your life and that you experience the full life that Jesus has for you.